Woo! Yeah. Hello, everyone. I want to welcome everybody out to the 2017 DC Black Film Festival for our closing night panel, Making Black Lives Matter Through Film. We obviously just watched a bunch of great films, so let's give it up for those films one more time. This panel is sponsored by the Office of Cable Television, Film, Music, and Entertainment and 202 Creates. My name is Kevin Sampson. I'm the director of the DC Black Film Festival. But you're probably not here for me. You're here for this great panel that we have gathered here today. I'm starting down here. We have the star of Junior, Elle Jae Stewart. The director of Junior, Pearl Gluck. We got the warrior lawyer himself, Wyndal Gordon. And cinematographer of 13th, Hans Charles. I was joking with Hans when he came in. I was like, dude, I didn't know you were that ripped. Goodness gracious. All right, so we're gonna get into what I feel is a very important conversation. I have to admit, in planning this festival, this is our first year. I'm so excited to get it off the ground, but I thought that this was gonna be, the pinnacle. It's the closing night, and this conversation is a very important one that we need to have. So we're gonna get into the serious stuff in a little bit, but I'm gonna give you guys a softball question first. So what's the first film or TV show in which you saw an image of a black person that you could personally relate to or look up to? We can start down with you, Elle Jae.
With me? It will definitely be The Cosby Show, specifically Claire Huxtable.
Say a little more about that.
You want me to say why Claire Huxtable? Well, okay, it was this woman who not only was a businesswoman, handled her business outside, but she also handled her business inside. She put her man in check and had her children in check as well, but she also showed that side of vulnerability. And the type of woman that she was is the woman that I grew up with. All of my grandmothers, well, both of my grandmothers and all of my aunties, they're very, very strong women, very, very vulnerable women. So at the same time, that means that they'll cut you quick. And for that, I look up to, and I am familiar with that type of woman.
That's good. That's a softball question for me. I actually really like that question, and the first thought I had was when I heard Sidney Lumet talk about the first time he saw the word Jew on camera, and it was Charlie Chaplin, who was not even Jewish, making one of the first films that would basically go like #resist, right? The great dictator. And for the first time ever, he was like, oh my God, I exist, I'm on screen. And for me, particularly, I was brought up Hasidic, which meant there was no watching movies or television. And then I discovered my parents had a hidden TV. And then I would cut school and start watching like every sitcom I can watch that was on like during that time where you could pretend you were still at school. And so The Jeffersons was the one, specifically for the Black experience. And it could be a very complicated answer, but I just got to say, I was like, all right, I get to learn about how many people live through this box instead of the way the Hasidic community is, which is very insular. So.
The one person I can say I looked up to was James Evans from Good Times. I appreciated his strength, his commitment to his family, his ability to get through the rough times and make sure that everybody stayed together as a unit, and his desire for the very best for his family and his doing the very best that he could. The other character that I can relate to is Martin. Martin Lawrence, because I'm sort of like him. I'm sort of quirky. I'm kind of folksy. I'm from D.C. area, graduated from H.D. Woodson here. And everything he represents, from when he's shadow boxing or whatever it is he's doing, to doing something crazy or saying something crazy, that's me. So I relate to him the most, I think.
I come from an immigrant family, and so we didn't really watch a lot of primetime television. We watched a lot of things in rerun. And so the character I feel like just sort of affected my family and who we paid attention to was Mr. T from the A-Team. Because my dad was just fascinated by Mr. T. He was fascinated by the mohawk. He was fascinated by the the gold chains, and it was like this conundrum for him. He just couldn't understand American culture based on Mr. T. So that was always, so we spent a lot of time explaining Mr. T to my dad. And then George Jefferson was always interesting because he reminded me of my dad. Like, they both had the same height. My dad wore a lot of suits because my dad is a preacher. And my dad was sort of obnoxious in that way. It's like he just had to find a way to have his way, even though he had a language barrier. So like that, so George always reminded me of my dad, and I always found the two kind of connected.
Thank you. All right, so I just want to make sure that we have one thing that is clear, right? All lives matter, right? We can all say that. We understand that. And the purpose of this conversation, which I'm going to get into a little story real quick, is because we obviously have an issue right now in terms of just black people being killed unjustly. And so the other day, it really hit me how important this conversation is to have. And I think part of it, the Washington Post, shout out to Ann Hornaday, gave a great article about having safe spaces like this one with the film festival where we can have these discussions so that we can learn about one another. So the other day, I'm sitting at home with my family, we're eating, and my wife, I have a 3-year-old son and a 4-year-old daughter. My son has this piece of plastic, and he's like shooting, pew, 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 pew. And I'm like, okay, cut it out, KJ. And my wife says, and your son was doing that at the restaurant yesterday in public, and he was aiming it at people. And sometimes when your wife is like, you need to have a conversation with your son. It was one of those moments, but for me, it was almost like an outer body experience because, I'm a young father, and suddenly I realized that I have to tell my son, and which I did. It was almost like telling him Santa Claus isn't real, but I had to tell him, look, you can't go in public and play like you're shooting with a piece of plastic. And he said, why? And I looked at him in the eyes, and I was just like, I don't want to lose it right now, but I had to tell him. So with that, why is it important with the work that you all have done that we try to educate and promote empathy? Roger Ebert said that film is one of the great empathy machines. So why do you think the work that you've done, whether it's with 13th or representing the Gaines family or Junior, is important? Why does it matter? We'll start down here with Hans.
It's interesting. So I have one of my graduate school professors, Alonzo Crawford here, sitting in the front row. I just saw him there, and I'm referencing him because I went to school at Howard for film school. We sort of had a particular kind of paradigm in the way we address film. And so one of those paradigms was not necessarily to educate or to project something out into the world. It's sort of more introspective, where you're reflecting something that's an inner truth. And if you reflect an inner truth, you have a better chance of representing something that's more universal, because we're inherently universal, we're inherently connected. So for me, just as a cinematographer, it's more interesting to me to create images that are in my head. Like I'm in some ways, I'm an activist as an image creator, but I'm not. Like, I'm really looking for a visual truth that's true to me and that makes sense to me. And I'm always trying to explore and try to figure it out. And it's out of that struggle that I think that people find something universal. And so there are a bunch of us, Arthur Jaffa is a guy that I have this conversation with a lot, that we really think about like what we call black image theory. What does it mean to create images that are true to who we want to be, and that happen to represent the people that we know? Like, that's what we're trying to do. We're not really trying to, or I'm not trying to. One of my professors used to say that, like, filmmakers aren't elected, so you don't get to have an agenda. You know what I mean? Like, it's not like a group of people elected you and therefore you have to go do something for the people. Like, you have to just be honest to your inner truth. And out of that, if you're good at that, that's how people are able to kind of find their own personal truth in the stuff that you present.
Well, I come from the adage that justice is the most sincere expression of love. And if you love justice and you love people, then you will show it in the work that you do. As you indicated, I represent Corinne Gaines, the Gaines family in Baltimore County, a young 23-year-old who was shot by police in her apartment. Her 5-year-old son was shot as well. But before Corinne Gaines in 2006, I represented the DC sniper. And I did all these things because I was interested in justice. I was interested in making sure that individuals are guaranteed those rights that we say they're guaranteed. And I feel that that is my calling. People always ask me time and time again, how can you represent someone you know who's guilty, whether he's a murderer or he was trespassing? And I say, I don't just defend the individual, I defend the Constitution. And to me, that's a noble calling, one of the noblest callings under the law that you can come up with. And so the voice, to answer your question, is giving a voice to the voiceless, standing in the gap and being their fearless defender and laying it all on the line. I mean, when I get into my cases, you know, I picture myself often in these positions. I'm looking at different scenarios. I'm looking at individuals who take the witness stand, and my job is to make the witness leave the stand looking at his shoes. And you wonder what that means. Well, you want him to be defeated because that is the type of zealousness that you need to go after those who are out there to do harm to your client. And that just carries over in every facet. So I just want to be that voice. I want to tell the stories. I want to give the other side, because there's so much attention given to one side that you forget about that the other side exists. And I want to bring parity. I want to bring balance, and I want the scales of justice to be properly calibrated so we can come out with the right decisions.
Yeah, amen to that. You know, I was in a documentary when I was younger, and and I was misrepresented, and I got really upset, and someone turned to me, Judith Helfand, actually, who's an amazing filmmaker in her own right, and she said, well, tell your own damn story. And that's pretty much the voice for me, and that doesn't necessarily have to be driven by my specific identity, but it is driven by what I believe and what I see, and voices I would like to give power to. So for me, I really feel like the word author and authority really drives me. The fact that, you know, this is also why I teach. I feel like if you can give people the opportunity to tell the stories they want to tell, if you can find ways to partner with organizations or funders, frankly, that can give you the opportunity to tell the stories you have to tell, that's where you take a stand. And so for me personally, you know, it hasn't exactly been a super easy journey, but it's been one that's been fulfilling. And so I did do a film about myself, and I did take that risk, and I hate being in front of the camera, including tonight, Kevin. But I did it, and I didn't do it alone. A film is very collaborative. It's about forming a community around what you have to say. And I completely agree. It's finding the visions in your head, if you're the director or if you're a cinematographer, or even if you're none of those, and making those come to life. And you know, it's the same that I've done with this feature we just finished about sex trafficking at truck stops. You know, I was never sex trafficked. How can I tell that story? I put myself into that world for reasons that are very close to me that have to do with what you were talking about, which is the pursuit of justice. And then I walked into Elle Jae's one-woman show, and I couldn't leave my seat. And the one thing I wanted to make sure we could do is, and she'll tell you about her work, it's not my work, but my work in this case was to make sure that it was uncomfortable for the very reasons that it is uncomfortable to allow this to continue. And so for me, the decision was that the camera would never leave her, would never leave the pain and the struggle to find the pain or leave the pain. The anger and frustration of allowing a camera in a room, that's what we're talking about, right? Filmmaking and allowing a camera to tell a story. So that kind of interplay with you're here, you're not here. And then she opened my eyes to Sojourner Truth's specific story with that, allowing her image to be taken. So I'll stop there in terms of voice. But for me, you know, that's what happened when I saw her play. I was blown away. The one little thing I'll tell you that she probably doesn't, she knows that's what inspired me, but it wasn't exactly the story. Before you entered that theater, you were given a press pass. And I got the New York Post. I did not want the New York Post. I asked for NPR, I asked for the New York Times, and they said you can't have that. This feeling that the press sits there and gawks, that was something I really wanted to get there. So that was for me, the voice that kept driving me is how do you tell your story even if it's not specifically yours? How do you connect as a human being through the camera?
Okay, so there's a quote that I live by, and it is, an artist's duty, as far as I'm concerned, is to tell or to reflect the times. That's by Nina Simone. That's what I live by as an artist. As a mother to a 6-year-old curly-haired little girl, I just want to be a superwoman in her eyes. So anything that I do, I not only put my all into, I put more than that. I call on my ancestors. I call on my mothers and my grandmothers and my sisters before me that I've never met but read stories about consistently. As an actress working in the line of service, if you will, I will not always have that opportunity to truly live and dig deep because you watch TV, you watch movies, a lot of the stuff that's put out there is hella surfaced, right? It doesn't really dig into why is this woman so passionate as she is versus her being the angry Black woman. You don't get her backstory. So in order for me to put images out, I had to step behind, put pen to paper, and really dig into the different lives and stories that women should tell. And specifically with Junior, I wanted it to be from the mother's perspective because you hear everybody else's story and who they think that individual is, and it's unfair. You weren't there to change that child's diapers. You didn't see them take their first walk. You didn't see them fall and cry, and you have to bring their bruises up. You don't know that individual. So in order for me as a mother who wants to be the superwoman in her daughter's eyes, and for me to live truthfully by Nina Simone's quotes, I have to put my all into the writing and the research and the delving, and I think that's my responsibility. If I'm gonna say that I'm an artist, then goddamn it, I need to be an artist. And a lot of times that means going into really, really uncomfortable places and bringing the truth out.
Appreciate it. So I think artists are the tastemakers of society. If you think about it, music, art, fashion, etc., we're able to kind of set culture in many ways. And I know we have a lot of filmmakers that are here, probably filmmakers that are tuning in on Facebook. One of the things for me is, sometimes I don't know what to do. It's like you wake up, you check your feed, and another killing, But for me as an artist, I typically think, okay, well, with this, obviously, we're doing the panel. Or as a filmmaker, I want to pick up a camera. And so I guess my question for you guys is, how can we actually tell these stories and get them out there? I think you all have, in your own right, told a story, shot a film, and gotten it out there. And I know sometimes for indie filmmakers, it's difficult to get the film seen. And then maybe for you, Jay Wyndal, coming from the law perspective, what's something that you would like to see filmmakers do to help you in your situation? Whoever the spirit hits.
I think in 2017, this is probably the best time ever to be an independent filmmaker. The blockbuster market has collapsed this summer. There's, I think, a series of 5 flops. You're gonna see between now and next March, a lot of smaller films are gonna get a lot more attention because the blockbuster is just not feeding Hollywood in terms of the domestic market. It's still doing a little something in the international market, but if they keep on putting out trash, it's gonna flop on the international market as well. I'm lucky enough to have transitioned from celluloid to digital. So I remember a time when filmmakers would struggle just to get the actual physical celluloid into a camera, get everything else, And then once they shot the film and all that, then a lot of filmmakers struggled just to get the film developed. And then once you got the film developed, there are like literally 10 other steps you got to do before an audience ever sees that film. It's just not the case today. So today, you don't have to worry about that anymore. That used to be a big part of, besides everything else you had to worry about, and getting whatever your vision was out there. Now you can think about marketing, and you can actually put energy into that. And now we're sitting on Facebook Live, and there's Instagram, and there's all these outlets to cultivate an audience. My creative partner and I have a podcast, which we've literally cultivated our own audience just because we wanted to, and it's been really helpful. So I think now, for me, there's no specific path, and that's sort of the beauty of it. There really was a specific thing you had to do 20 years ago. When my professor, Alonzo Crawford, when he's always been making movies the last 30 years, when he was making movies on celluloid, there was like this specific thing he had to do in order to get people to see his films. And now it's not the case. And what's amazing about people like him is he's like, yeah, I got digital, so I'm making even more movies now than I was before. So I think when I look at the audience, I'm actually asking the question, well, you guys tell me what is the new pathway, because you're the ones who are going to discover it, because you're going to discover it because you don't have a 3-picture deal. You're not going to get in front of Netflix or Hulu or Yahoo or whoever's going to come up next. So you're going to innovate, and you're going to find the next path. I mean, crowdsourcing in the way we've been doing it is people who didn't have access who went to the crowdsource, not people who had access. If you had a 3-picture deal, you were not crowdsourcing, right? And now everybody wants to go to crowdsourcing as a means of being free from either a specific funder or the studio system, to be truly independent. So I think the question really is to flip back on the audience and filmmakers out there, because they're the ones who are going to innovate. They're the ones I'm going to copy. It was indie filmmakers who took a 5D and decided to turn it into a camera, because pros would have never done that, because they would be like, the ergonomics are wrong, this is wrong, that's wrong, right? And it's the DIY person who pushed companies like Red to create what they created, because if it wasn't for the DIY folks, DPs in Hollywood would have never switched from film to digital, not in a million years. So the question is really to the audience, like, you guys tell me, what are the things that what new app did you discover? What new method of paying people have you discovered that's going to make it easier for those of us who are used to the traditional way of doing things?
And we will do audience Q&A in a second.
What I would like to see is more complex pictures of African American life. I'm tired of I shouldn't say I'm tired of it, but we've done the slave movies, we've done the drug dealer movies. I want to see some more complex figures. I want to see some more insecures, or some figures that just depicts all facets of African American life, not just the disadvantaged facet of it, but people who grew up in households perhaps like mine, and perhaps the Cosby Show, and things like that. So I want to see more positive images. I would love to see a documentary on defense attorneys. Again, and yeah, I'm gonna put it out there, because we have legions and legions of stories. We have tons of stories. We get into the household with Junior's mom. I've been there, and that's why that picture tonight was very riveting for me, because it allows me to reflect upon the times that I was in that house, and just reflect upon my own 2-year-old son and what she must be going through. And we have other stories where the opposite side of Junior, where you're the mother of the person who may have taken out somebody else's child. And how do you deal with those complexities as a defense attorney? Because defense attorneys, I think we're the real lawyers, because it's unscripted. Like in a civil case, you have depositions, you have transcripts that you can use to impeach individuals, but defense attorneys, at least in these two, in Maryland, you don't have that. You have to rely upon your instincts, your strategy, and your wit, and you have to be quick with all the above. So if someone was to follow me inside of a courtroom and really take it all in, it's not all LA law or anything like that. Sometimes it's a little slower, but there are a lot of vicissitudes. There's a lot of emotional roller coasters that you go through, up and down. You talk about bipolar in one of these movies. Oh yeah, you have a lot of that in the law. So it's a very interesting field, and I like to make law sexy. And I think law and cooking shows are sexy these days. Well, but those are the things that people really, because they don't really understand it, they never really get to see the sausage being made. So I think that it would generate a lot of interest.
Yeah, I'm really glad you said that about complexity. You know, with the films that I've done in the past, they've either gone to what we call niche festivals, right? So Jewish film festivals, women's film festivals. Now with Junior, I have the opportunity to take films to Black film festivals. And you know, I think it is super important to have sacred space to talk about the complexities of various identities that aren't being represented on camera. But I want to share with you what happened in our work together, which is probably one of the reasons why we're both up here. You know, you're looking at the writer. This is a voice that is authentic, right? And you heard Elle Jae talk about why she does her work. And then here I come, right? I am neither a mother nor Black. And we had started having this conversation about teaching in and teaching out, and why is that a paradigm? And how can we interplay? I mean, there's so much I didn't know. Even though I'm a human being, I've been fighting for equality, you know, I'm an activist, you know, and yet there's so much I don't know. And that was very interesting for me. And, you know, as a filmmaker, right, technically speaking, it's too long, right? That should be like an 18-minute film at the top. If you're just gonna look at narrative structure, we got the beginning, the character wants something, then she has something that she struggles with, and she realizes what she needs, end of film, right? I mean, not to be so crass, but we are in the business of filmmaking, and to be able to make change, we also have to know how to get someone to support our work, right? It has to get funded. So, you know, we would talk about that. Like, we gotta shorten the script. I don't know how to do it. And then she would make a case, line after line. And it would just open my mind, and we'd find different ways to do it. And I'll end with this situation, this anecdote. Finally, it came down to the dress. And you're gonna love this. It was originally a white dress in theater. And what's the first thing I said to her? I was like, you can't wear a white dress in a film. You can, but it's really tough on lighting and this, that, and the other. We're following you around in one, 20-minute shot. I'd really appreciate if we can rethink. And do you remember what you said? Oh. She said, I'm so glad you said that, Pearl. I've always wanted it to be a red dress for Michael Brown's mom. And it's that kind of magic that collaboration brings forth. You do not make a film in a vacuum. And so if that means speaking inside the community, whether it's women, Jewish, Black experience, look for the complexity in the identity. And if that's of interest to you, and it doesn't have to be, look for voices outside of that experience if that's of interest. It doesn't have to be. And then find where that magic can come, which neither of you are expecting. And even for something as technical as a white dress, it still brings up what's important to both the writer, the creator, the artist, the actor, the director, the camera person, etc.
So when it comes to telling stories, I'm trained in theater, right? I have my bachelor's, my master's in theater. I'm a theater geek. I love it forever. But what I realized early on very quickly is that films is what really transcends, right? You can really touch a lot of people based on what you put on the silver screen. I am a graduate of a HBCU, Alabama State University, a proud member of a Divine Nine, Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. I want to see... I know so many different Black people, it's ridiculous, okay? And I know people from other different races as well. And seeing all of those stories would just be immaculate for me. You just don't know how it makes me feel when I see a woman on screen with thick thighs and wide hips and natural hair. It honestly makes me feel comfortable in my own skin. Yeah, I'm lighter skinned, but everybody else in my family is brown or of the darker complexion. Growing up, I would have people call me white girl, which really pissed me off. And when I was younger, I wasn't the type of person that would sit in a corner and cry. I would ball up my fist and come toward you. So when that term was said to me at one point, and I got into a lot of trouble, I had to actually be expelled for it. I had to ask myself then, what is it that I want to present to the world? And that's what actually made me get into acting. That was my senior year in high school, how I can tell different stories and why people may look at me differently. So I've always been really obsessed with the way people think and the way they move and the rhythm of their breath and the movement of their feet. So that went into my exploration as an actress and my exploration of people, period. And if we could see more complex characters on the screen, a real backstory, a real foundation of who this individual is, I think will be more powerful, and I think it will actually make more of us even more human, if that makes any sense, because now you will start to see the vulnerability that each one of us have. We all have insecurities, we all have things that we're afraid of, that we're shy of, but if those characters are brought out in whatever the film is, even if it is funny, even if it is an insecure, which I absolutely love, then it makes you feel more comfortable in your own skin and you're able to be yourself, if that makes any sense. Yeah.
Okay, so for the audience, if you guys can go ahead and think of any questions that you might have right after this one, I'm gonna come out in the audience, old school, Donahue, Sally Jesse Raphael, Oprah style. The last question I'm gonna ask you guys, I think with any kind of movement, et cetera, it takes collaboration. Now, I'm also a film critic, Picture Lock Show. One of the things that I notice as a critic is that sometimes things get lumped into, this is a black film. And I think in the conversation that we're having right now, sometimes we have to step across the aisle. Right, so I think Junior is a perfect example, and you kind of hit that, Pearl, already in terms of stepping across the aisle, and in this situation, be it race, to really tell each other's story, right? And so one of the debates we always have is, even like you just said, Pearl, sometimes we have the different festivals, and you have like these niche festivals, and it's the black festivals, and amongst our critics, sometimes like something like this you're not gonna come to. But it shouldn't be that way, right? So I think for me as a black film critic, I see all films, right? But how do we get it where we step across the aisle, and not just because suddenly Get Out is all the rage. Now, all the film podcasts that I listen to that are generally two white guys that are talking, now they go see it because they heard something, but they didn't see it to begin with. So I know that might be a complex question, and we'll go to the audience after this, but how do we actually reach across the aisle where all of the films that come out are important to one another? And I love the fact that right now we have a mixture of races in this audience. That says a lot.
I'm always referencing Arthur Jafa because we literally spend, we talk on the phone a lot. AJ is a cultural critic, cinematographer, just did a bunch of stuff for Solange, just did the 444 video for Jay-Z. He's got a art installation called Love is the Message and the Message is Death. And so AJ and I are always working through these theories, right? We're both practitioners of cinematography, but we're really interested in theory. And so we have there's a whole thing that we have in trying to make cinematography, at least from our perspective, have kind of the same weight, power, and sustainability as black music. And black music is just worldwide influential, right, for the last 50, 60 years. So one of the things that one of the ideas that we've worked out was that black music never sought to water itself down, like the industry watered itself down, but black music never said, I have to make this more palatable. Even now, when somebody makes a crossover hit, and they're like, I gotta make this a more crossover hit, those hits usually don't last, right? So it's like the songs that people wrote for themselves, didn't care what anybody thought. Those are the ones, because those are the most authentic. And for us, and for me, so coming from Howard as a graduate film program, I'm obsessed with the history of black people in the American film industry. And the history of black people in the American film industry is a history of accommodation, right? Black people have always tried to assimilate into the larger culture in terms of filmmaking. And the industry from early on has always had black players in it, always. But there's always been a lack of sustainability because of a larger structural problem. So for people like AJ and I, the thought is, this is the time to stop making that effort and to just be true and authentic. Because we have seen, if you study the history, you've seen people attempt to do that, to say, okay, this is a larger tent, I'm just telling a human story, just pay attention. And we've tried to do that, and it doesn't work. You're always gonna, in my opinion, you're always gonna end up bitter, and you're gonna end up mad. You're gonna end up on the other side of the spectrum, right? So it's just like, for me, music is the template, Look at rap music. When rap music came out, people said it was a fad, and people still regionally continue to make the music they wanted to make. Yes, there were crossover people. Yes, there were record labels involved, but you still have people still talk about boom bap. People still talk about, what's going on in Texas and in New Orleans is authentic. Hyphy in the Northwest, and obviously, gangster rap and gangster funk in LA, bass in Florida. Like, people are trying to be authentic to that specific music. Be like, you come to this, I don't go to you. Master P is a great example of that. Like, he didn't try to go, they tried to get him crossover and he just said no. And he just continued to make his music, and then the audience found him. So that's my template, is I have to continue to make the images in the movies that I want to, that comes out of me. Because I have a history that tells me if I attempt to do the other thing, then I'm gonna get shut down, it's not gonna work out. I feel like the one thing black people in this country, in terms of the history of American cinema, have not attempted to do is just we're just gonna make movies. And this is the time that we can make them in a way we've never been able to make them. We could make them and preserve them. And then when the audience is ready, the pearls will be there. So for me, that's because that exercise then all my energy gets to go and just making stuff and collaborating with other people. I don't have to worry about the other component.
Well, I don't know much about filmmaking, but I do consume films. And so if you have a good story, I think, to me, it's the story, and you put out a good product, I think that you will live on in perpetuity. I just feel that films become classics because they start off with a lot of planning and preparation, and the story is good.
Hear, hear. I think it's a complicated question because, in a way, when Hollywood started, right, many have written about this, right? It's the Jews that went to Hollywood and started it, dumped their Jewish wives, and it's the ultimate story of trying to conform and pass, right? They dumped their Jewish wives, they, created characters that looked nothing like themselves and funded stories that looked nothing like themselves, and et cetera. And it took people like Fanny Brice, and then, of course, my big hero, Barbra Streisand, which will come as no surprise to you, who said, no, I'm not gonna fix my nose, I'm not gonna change the way I talk, I'm gonna do this the way I wanna do it, and I'm gonna, you're gonna dump your Jewish wives, well, I'm gonna go get Chris Christopherson and Robert Redford, thank you very much. And so, they're not Jews, by the way, so she kind of switched it, okay? So, I hear you, and, this continues, right? We all want to see we want to see stories that we can connect with, that speak our language, and to do that on film, we're going to not only have to cultivate an audience, but we must find those who will fund it. I cannot say that enough. And, that's a huge piece of the puzzle. And, yes, we need to cultivate the audiences. Yes, we need to find our true stories and tell them and not conform and stop passing for what we think funders want to see, funders, even ticket buyers. Okay, one quick note about Get Out. So this is where we met, Central Pennsylvania, okay? Where nobody was surprised at what happened during the election, okay? And there we have a theater about twice this size, which is constantly empty when films come to play. Well, Get Out kept selling out. So look at that movie, I wouldn't shoo it away. And same with Moonlight. Look at why and how they got to be where they are, who funded it, what is making these things possible, and tell your stories. I was just on the jury for the Hamptons Film Festival for students, because that's where we should be looking. And let me tell you, there are some great stories coming out. So we shouldn't be like, oh, woe us or whatever. There are some really powerful stories coming out, but we've got to find ways to support these narratives so that these stories can be told. My grandmother used to say this in Yiddish, what's the point of a story? Mit etzem Wand. You're going to talk to the wall. You have to know your audience. That's the other really big piece. Who are you talking to? Who are you trying to appeal to? And then go and find the funds. I'm just talking to myself here too, by the way, and tell it. But if we want to change the narrative that appears on screen, we need to find those who are going to make that happen.
I'll try to make it real quick. So I'm trained. Let's put that out there. What that means in undergrad at the HBCU, I always credit that theater for actually teaching me and giving me the foundation of acting under the tutelage of Dr. Tommy Tonia Stewart. We did slave plays. I learned the names of all the slave ships. I learned about my ancestors at that school. I learned about a lot as a woman and as a Black woman in my power, right? I then go to grad school at Penn State, where it's central Pennsylvania. If you've never been there, then go, it's beautiful, but it's central Pennsylvania. There was a Black man who was killed on Nittany Mountain, just 6 years ago, right? And it was racially profound. But I say that to say this, in my graduate program, and I absolutely loved my schooling, don't get me wrong, but a lot of times it could come across as, oh, well, you have to do it like this, or you have to do it like that. I'll never forget, after one semester, we were doing Shakespeare. For me, an actress, cannot stand it because they put him on such a high pedestal, a person who is known to be illiterate with a 5th grade education. Not to say that you're not an intelligent person, because I have people in my family that didn't really go to school and they are intelligent. But if I go to your museum in Stratford's in London, and I see you write your name 6 different ways, how am I to believe that you actually wrote these plays? But that's a different story. Okay, so I can remember one of my classmates saying, you hate Shakespeare so much, and if she's watching, I love her to death, she's one of my sisters. If you hate Shakespeare so much, what are you gonna do? What are you gonna do in the real world? And I simply said, without missing a beat, plays that are for us, by us. I've never been the individual who want to assimilate. Why? Why should I? I don't have to, because I lived presently in my life and have seen so many different stories of my people that need to be told, and I give my all to that. If you got it, if you're good, eventually it's gonna come. I don't believe in the term of selling out. I don't believe in doing what I need to do to make it. I'm in Hollywood right now. I've been there for a year. My physique does not fit Hollywood. All of them are this thin. I refuse. I like cornbread. I'm gonna eat it, okay? I recently went natural. I told my agent I'm thinking about locking my hair up. They told me to lay low on that. You can do the natural, but let's not lock for a minute. I'm like, okay, I'll do that. I'll give you a year. Make sure I get a feature or something, right? If I'm not gonna lock my hair up. But I say that to say this. I feel so strong, and let's not forget, I'm doing this for my 6-year-old daughter who looks at me constantly. I feel so strong being comfortable in my own skin. Therefore, I must emulate that with the work that I do. And I may not be able to get all the work because I'm not able to backbend, but one day it will come, and I feel comfortable in that. And those filmmakers out there, please don't feel like you need to do this or that or the third just so somebody can give you a like or a mention or whatever. That shit don't mean nothing anyway, sorry. And I'm gonna leave it at that.
All right. So we probably have about 20 more minutes. So we're gonna open it up to the audience for questions. Does anybody have any questions for the panelists? I'll come over to you.
Hello, my name is Anthony Bartlett. I'm one of the directors for Black Friday. My question, my question is one as kind of like as a struggling artist. Even in the film, I kind of aspire to pay homage to a lot of the auteurs or kind of the film movements that have kind of come through just the medium in general. So I guess my question is, I think I agree that the Hollywood formula is kind of dismantling, you know, and it kind of feels reminiscent of that new American cinema, you know, independence. So forgive me, I try to write this down. Is it imperative that the Black community create a definitive film movement, and how do we as artists aspire to those levels of mastery without it feeling almost reactionary to whiteness?
And you don't all have to answer if you don't really want, you know. But that's a great question.
I want to answer that because this is my academic work. I mean, one of the great things about having gone to Howard was some of the weaker-minded students, and my professor might agree with me, some of the weaker-minded students always thought it was an either-or proposition at Howard. It never was. It was never, you either do the studio system or you do independent. It was just, we were given the opportunity to decide options and to pick what would work best for us. So I'm not a person who's like this or that. Like if Netflix calls and says, "Hey, we want you to do something," I'm not gonna turn the opportunity down, but I'm gonna say, "This is what I want to do." Like I'm not gonna do what you want to do. If you don't want me to do it, I'm just gonna keep on doing what I'm doing, like because I'm happy. What I think that we should do as people of color in this country, and I think it's just in terms of the filmmaking community and what I've engaged in with AJ. This is kind of the work that we're doing, and I'm doing it more formally, academically, is creating what I call a black film theory. We don't really have a formalized black film theory. So that's like the academic work I'm doing. I teach at George Mason University, and I'm using that platform to kind of sit and think critically and seriously about what it means. What does that term mean? And I actually don't think, like my work is not prefaced on creating a black film theory. It's actually just creating the foundations for what somebody else is gonna figure out what the black film theory is, right? So that's kind of what I'm interested in. So I don't necessarily think it's a matter of like, you have to tear this thing down, because I think if you study the history of people of color in the American film industry, we've constantly been engaging in this thing since the beginning. Oscar Michaud, we have been engaging in this critically from the beginning, right? And different movements of color, Cuban cinema, the stuff that Simbin has done, we've always been trying to wrestle with this stuff. So it's nothing new. I think that you as an individual filmmaker is just figure out what inspires you, how have you applied that critically, and then you look at the breadth of what you can do, what you've done and what other people have done, your peers have done, and then you could decide critically, like, okay, this is what I've been influenced by this. Like, you might like be influenced by like rap music in a real way. So if you could just figure out how does that incorporate, then that's your thing. That doesn't have to be a reaction. It doesn't have to be this like, it doesn't have to be a movement. The other thing is, I would say, just as an aside, is definitely study the history of people of color in the American cinema, and the history of American cinema, because we've had those movements, right? They haven't been publicized. If you read the right books, you'll read them. And filmmakers of color in this country have always kind of wrestled with what was going on in the larger zeitgeist. And some of them have tried to do what you said, to just react directly, like, I'm gonna master cinematography, we're gonna make the best. You know, some of them have tried to just be more organic. Charles Burnett, I think, is our best example. Killer Sheep is the best example of a person of color coming out of a specific space that ingests the larger culture and then puts out something that's sort of amazing and different. And that is now the foundation for American cinema. Like, here's a very specific black film that is now seen as a very specific American film and has not lost its blackness, which is part of my theory, that the blackness and the Americanness don't have to be separate necessarily. So I think it's to say concisely, it's a matter of studying the history of American cinema and people of color in American cinema, and then people of color in cinema worldwide, and how they've interacted with different types of cinemas.
I don't know if anybody else.
Wow. I'm going to come at that from another angle and just tell you what keeps me going sometimes. And it's there are two Talmudic expressions and completely opposite of each other. One is know before whom you stand. So know your history, what he said. And then the other is we stand on the shoulder of giants, but we see more than they do because we're on their shoulders. So.
I think we had a question over here.
Good evening. First, I want to say hello. I'm a Howard professor and a Howard graduate as well. I wanted to say a lot of you guys touch on some major issues, especially information on, I like your quote, justice is the most sincere expression of love. In addition to being a professor, okay. In addition to being a professor, I'm also a speech pathologist. And so I believe that there's a story behind the story. In addition to the black men that were killed, there were a lot that had mental disabilities. They also had communication disorders, cognitive disorders that weren't answered. But on the flip side, as we are talking about Black Lives Matter through film, my question to you guys is, how do you guys charge yourself to make sure you're telling both sides of the story? For example, the officers that see dead bodies and murders every day, there's PTSD and mental illness on that side. And so while we're doing documentaries that build awareness of Black lives, it also builds anger in us. But where do we flip the side to say maybe it's not always racism and there's mental issues on that side? So where's your charge on moving forward and opening the doors to both sides of the story?
Great question.
Thank you so much for bringing that up, and that is very important. My husband is working on a documentary, Protect and Serve, which he won an Emmy for, short version of it, and we were thinking about creating a series doing just that. Now let's try to tell the story of the police officer and what's going on in their household. What did they wake up with that day? What's going on with them? Because it is multiple stories to every story, right? And I do think that it is a responsibility for us, although we are telling it from an experience of this is what happened in our Black lives, and instead of fighting at or spewing at the other person, like what could that person, what's their voice behind it? Yeah, that's important. That's very, very important. And I'm pretty sure a lot of people think about that or want to do it, but that's all I have to say about that,
Well, I consider myself somewhat of an artist just by virtue of what I do. I don't accept the charge to tell other people's stories, so to speak. I tell the story that I'm commissioned to tell, that because I represent a certain individual. I'll tell both sides if it's my story. But if I'm telling someone else's story, I'm going to tell their story because 9 times out of 10, you've heard the other side, at least in what I do. And so that transcends over into real life. You have other people telling these other stories. I want to hear the story that the least of us know about. That's the one that's going to interest me because it's going to give me perspective. It's going to be enlightening. It's going to open my mind. So you don't have to accept, well, I shouldn't tell you, you know what you do, but I feel as though I don't have to accept everyone's charge. I accept the charge that I place upon myself, and I convict myself to that.
I think for me as a filmmaker, it's important that I'm always telling my truth, because if I do that, then it's retarded to say I'm empowered people to do anything, but maybe people see me doing my thing from my perspective, and they're inspired to do something from their perspective. So for me, telling whatever story I'm going to tell about how an interaction with an officer of the law, how it's affected me, maybe that inspires that person to pick up the camera and pick up the pen and tell their story from their perspective. And I could be surprised that they tell something that I never expected to come out of their story. And I think that's where the artist thing kind of comes along. That's where we become kindred spirits, because we're so honest in the art that then the politics and all that, not that it falls to the side, but our linkage, our foundation is the art. And sometimes it's as basic as tell your own story. So for me, it's just be truthful, be honest, be open to criticism. Not whatever's going on in my story doesn't mean it can't be criticized, doesn't mean that it's perfect. And if I do that, then maybe that opens up somebody else to be willing to take up their pen and their camera and their situation to tell the story that they want to tell.
Speaking of your husband, Tom, so yeah, you should tell your story. And sometimes if you're up for it, put yourself in situations where you really don't want to be. So, I went to find out about a story about a man who put up a Confederate flag in Millheim, Pennsylvania. I'm now working on a fictional film based on that. And a woman tried to get him to take it down, and it started a flag war in a small town. Now, of course, it's ridiculously and unfortunately highly relevant, and I was hoping it wouldn't have to be. So Tom was my student at the time, and he came out with me to shoot a couple of interviews I was taking, just so I can write it as a fictionalized narrative based on the conversation. Not comfortable for me as a Jewish woman, but it just didn't occur to me how hard it was for Tom. And I have a photograph of him shooting at this woman who refuses to take this huge Confederate flag off. And at one point he turned to me and he said, "I'm out. I'm putting this camera down and I'm leaving." And I said, "Tom, pick up that camera. I'm right here. Nothing's going to happen to you except that you're going to end up making much more powerful films because of it. I mean, I'm not the one behind the camera. You are." Right? And so, it was hard for me, first of all, because I didn't realize who I had brought into that situation. I don't know if that's a good thing or a bad thing. But I was just thinking about my own fear of what I'd have to listen to and hear. It wasn't comfortable for me to talk to people who were involved in sex trafficking either, or truckers who I knew were lying to me. And then those who were telling me the truth, But, sometimes I'm with you. You got to hear the other side. There is a short film you might be interested in about a woman who does end up shooting someone. And it's called Night Calls. And it's just about coming out now, making its way through the festivals.
Great. I think we have time for one last question. So we're going to have this question right here, and then we'll wrap up after that.
Hi, my name is Leah Johnson. I'm one of the filmmakers. American Refugee is my film. And I've been loving this conversation. I appreciate all of you guys for being here and sharing your thoughts. And I was curious if you could talk a little bit about what you think about, previously it was all about distribution, was the way to reach the audience and monetize the film. Now I know it's very much about cultivating your audience. And I'm curious what you all have experienced as far as your responsibility to respond to your audience members that now have the ability to ask you questions and expect your responses on the films that you make about very specific characters or very specific cultural points of view. I'm curious where your individual thresholds are for the interaction with your audience at this point.
I have a joke. You guys don't know this person, but my creative partner is Menelik Lumumba. We just finished a film called One Angry Black Man. And when we're together, it's kind of crazy. We have a podcast together. It's really crazy. And so we spend a lot of time talking about, on our film podcast, about Nate Parker and the other gentleman, what's his name? The writer. Oh, he just did something about, no. He did something in the UK about the UK uprising in the 60s, and there were no black women. I'm forgetting his name. But anyway, they had these really bad responses to the audience. And we made this joke that if somebody says something that we don't like, we say, "Thank you for that question. I hadn't thought about that before." That's why we have these Q&As, so the audience can, so it can get me to think, and I'm gonna think about that with the next movie I make. I think it makes no sense as a filmmaker to storm out of your film angry or to get into shouting matches with the audience, because I don't think the audience comes there for that. And even if you have one or two people who do, it's so easy to diffuse a situation from up here. You just have to be an insecure person, in my humble opinion, if you can't figure that out. You gotta take the tough questions. You have to know when you were making that movie that everybody was not going to respond. You can't be a dude in America, make movies with women in it, and not think that somebody's going to be like, "What was that character doing? Why did she say that?" You have to be willing. You have to be prepared for that. In this media age where everybody has in my opinion, some sort of media training, just by virtue of putting stuff on Facebook and Instagram and having had that response, So for me, I'm always shocked when I see filmmakers have these really bad PR moments with a situation. Somebody just asks you a question, and it's gosh, his name just escaped me again. But it was like, why weren't there any black women in this film? And in the history, there was like, it was full of black women. And he went crazy. Oh, my wife, and you guys are disrespecting my wife. And I was like, that's not what they asked you. Like, and if you didn't have an answer, the answer is, thank you for that question. I hadn't thought about that. This is why I do Q&As, so I can think about that in the future. Thank you, ma'am. Like, you can get pictures after that. You know what I mean? Like, that's your job as a person up here with dealing with controversial matters is to get out of the audience, get out of the theater without a bad PR moment. Because I think you're a filmmaker, you're responsible for the life of your film outside of what you shot, outside of the screening, That's when you can't just do any old thing. You can't get into any old shouting match. You can't get into no Twitter fights because you now have a piece of property that you are now responsible for. And, I'm gonna get into controversy. The whole thing with Nate could have avoided all that mess because Oprah said, let me help you with this. And he was like, no, I don't need help. I can do it on my own. So for me, there are people willing to help you. If there's something in your film, there are people, because people screen their films. There's gonna be people like, this little character is gonna be a problem. How are you gonna deal with that? You gotta be like, okay, let's figure out how to deal with that. Like, let me figure out what the response is. Let me test that out. Like, I think there's nothing wrong with that. Because I think, in this day and age, we're closer to our audiences than we've ever been. And so you gotta listen to the questions that people have. Like, maybe you answer the question. Maybe they do make you think about something you hadn't thought before. So I think being open to that is, my opinion is like something you have to be open to. And you have to be prepared for it. And everybody's not gonna like your movie. Everybody's not gonna like your characters. Everybody's not gonna like your dialogue. And they might be right. Like, what if they're right? So what do you do about that? So that's my answer to that.
Yeah, I think the bottom line is that we take risks as filmmakers. We're putting our voice out there, we're screaming from the mountain, right? And it used to be that we'd go to film festivals and actually meet our audiences, and it was this warm, fuzzy feeling, or whatever, angry matches, or whatever it is, and then you go home and make your next film. And now it continues. The film festival interactions continue, which I think is awesome, and I'm totally petrified at times about, this very feed, what's gonna happen under here, because it's live, and there's no editing. But I think that's, the warm, fuzzy answer is you get to have dialogue and interaction, and the scary one is the real world we live in, and what might happen if you tell your truth. I agree with you. Got to be ready.
I'll give you a real life experience that just happened with Junior, right? So, of course, it was a play first. At the end of the play, I had a colleague at grad school say, hey, I just want to take you out to dinner. I saw your play, and I thought it was great, but I have some questions. And I said, oh, okay. So we go out to dinner. It's just she and I. We're sitting directly across from one another. And she said, yeah, you did great. The acting was fine, but I just have to know, it just bothered me. You didn't talk about, what about the police officers that are murdered? And I said, well, that's not what the story was. Yeah, but there are cops that are murdered, and you didn't touch on that, and you did X, Y, and Z. So I allowed her to get her point out, and I thanked her for that, for being so honest with me. And I just had to tell her this was not that story. She said, yeah, but it made me so uncomfortable. I said, then I did my job. Then I did my job. So that was that instance. Then with the movie version, Junior, there was a white woman that walked up to me at the end of the showing in LA at Indie Night, and she gave me a big hug, and she said, that was such a beautiful story, and it's not just a Black story. This is a universal story. And I was taken aback completely, because I always thought of and saw this as just, and I was okay with that. But when she said that to me, I was like, okay, I touched you in a different spot. I've done my job. And then, unfortunately, the anniversary of Mike Brown's, AKA Mike, that's what his mother affectionately called him, his anniversary of his death just passed on August 9th. And of course, I posted something on our Junior page saying, rest in heaven, you sweet angel. And someone posted, this guy stole cigarillos and was a murderer, and not a murderer, he stole cigarillos and he, got off on the cop and blah, 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 just real negativity. And so I just simply responded with, interesting, period. And that's it. I mean, it is. It's like we have to be open for that crazy criticism that comes our way, and then the people that give the beautiful notes, and then those that just feel uncomfortable, then okay, because once it's out there, once it's in the universe, it's no longer yours. It's just, it takes its own life, its own wings. So, yeah.
You know, when I was planning DC Black Film Festival and I was just envisioning this conversation has been everything and more. So I'd like us to give a round of applause to this amazing panel.
I think, Kevin, we've all been trying to get a word in and say this to you, but thank you so much. I know this is your first year, and this is unbelievable. This is
Thank you.
unbelievable.
Thank you. Woo! All right, I'll take a moment. Why did you do that? We live on Facebook. I know, that is true. I got to tell my son, listen, we cry. But live on Facebook to like, I don't know how many people. It's been an honor and a pleasure to have this festival happen. Check out DCBFF.org. I mean, like, obviously, once I got here, then I was already planning for next year. I think this has been amazing. Thank you so much for coming out and supporting. One important thing, I think that what we've done here, and sometimes we go to, it could be a festival, it could be a church service, it could be a community rally, whatever. Sometimes we get hype because we're in the moment, right? We're having this conversation. But I want to continue the conversation. So make sure if you're on Facebook right now, let's have some comments. Let's go back and forth. Again, you can reach out to me through the festival. But I think this is something that we need to have. And I want to make sure that we continue to have these conversations because like you guys were just saying, you have to hear from both sides, right? And you got to come to the table and you got to say, hey, I might not like what they're going to say, but I'm going to listen. And if we don't have those conversations, we can't break down walls. So once again, thank you so much for coming out. This has been amazing. Thank you guys for giving me your time. This has been an amazing conversation. Let's definitely continue it, but we're going to have to continue it outside. All right.